Perfect. And I think we're good here. Okay, well, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me back here again. It is wonderful to be here in front of everyone, remote as it is. And I am looking forward to when the pandemic ends so that I can come visit the chapter. I hear wonderful things about Tennessee. I've never been, though. So this is actually one of the older presentations that I have, but I keep updating it, and I am shocked every time I give this that we're still talking about the same thing. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is phishing, something you're probably familiar with, but probably something you haven't seen before, and something that is I find very fascinating. So a little bit more about myself. I am currently the Director of Cybersecurity Services at Richie May Technology Solution for another couple of days. Friday, tomorrow, is my last day at the firm. It's been a wonderful over 2 years that I've been with the firm. Phenomenal people, phenomenal team. But I was at the point that I really missed being technical, and I think you'll see that through the presentation. And I reflected, especially during the pandemic, of what really makes me happy, what I like doing, and I like working on incidents, penetration tests. I like getting really technical and in the weeds on things. And I found a new home at CrowdStrike. So I will be the senior manager of the Overwatch Elite team, doing managing a team of threat hunters around the world. So working on nation state attacks, e-crime, all kinds of fun stuff like that. So I start that in another week, and I'm super excited about that. Prior to joining Richie May, I had a boutique cybersecurity firm in Los Angeles, California, where I still reside. Richie May actually bought that out over 2 years ago, and it was a nice marriage for the last 2.5 years. But while I had my own boutique cybersecurity firm, I did a lot of penetration tests. I did incident response, threat hunting. I worked with a lot of the studios and vendors here in Los Angeles since I'm so close to Hollywood. And so I've done a lot over the last 14, 50 years. I also volunteer for the U.S. Marine Corps Cyber Auxiliary Unit. We're actually doing a CTF exercise next week, so I'm pretty excited about that as well. I also teach at local community colleges. I've built up some of the first ever offensive and defense security courses at many of the colleges in Southern California. So that's kind of my passion and pastime, is giving back to the community and trying to take some of the knowledge over the last 14 or 15 years and giving that back to people who are interested and hungry in learning about this stuff. I've got a ton of certifications. I couldn't fit them all on the screen. I'm constantly learning, developing my skills, and trying to find the next big thing. A little bit about Richie May, since they are still my employer. It started out as 35 years ago as a tax and audit firm. However, several years ago, they realized that they were more of a business advisory company than a tax company. And so they started branching out on several different areas, including governance, risk, compliance, doing SOC reports and whatnot, doing technology management. And then I was the third person to join the cybersecurity team and build that out. So we've had exponential growth, and when I joined 2 years ago, I was the third person, and now we've got over 10 people on the team. So it's been an awesome couple of years with a lot of growth, but a lot of really experienced people who have had different seats and different positions in companies all coming together and now acting as advisors, trusted advisors for many companies in different sectors, mostly in the entertainment industry and financial, but we've got clients all over the place. So let me tell you a little bit about some stats. Some of these are outdated, but we all get the point from this. So when I first started this presentation back in 2018, these were all fresh and new stats. 92.4% of malware is delivered via email. That's part of the Verizon DBI report. That was 2018's report. There's been a couple of reports since then, but the trend remains pretty much the same in all the different reports you look at, that malware is still primarily delivered over email. And sure, they could be on a USB drive in your parking lot, or it could be from a user going to a malicious site, or, Tor, or whatever it is. But the reality is most of the malware is still delivered over email. Kaspersky Labs put out a report, and they said that in 2017, they prevented, and you got to remember, this is one vendor, Kaspersky alone, that they prevented $36 million in just 1 year. That's a whole lot of nasty phishing emails by one provider. But how many providers are there? That's just one. There's Mimecast, there's Office 365, there's so many other places out there. And then The average user receives about 16 malicious emails per month. I honestly think that's a little bit low. I'm guessing that statistic was from Symantec was more around things that got through spam filters, because from what I see in our team, which we've got about 4 people that daily they monitor phishing and malicious email activity for a lot of our clients, we see far more than that on a regular basis, but a lot of it does get caught by the different tools that we have in place. And then the graph on the right-hand side of the screen there, it goes into emails that were delivered to users that had malicious content. What's the makeup? What are they? Are they Excel documents? Are they zip files? Are they PDFs? Where do they come in? Are they just plain old executables? And so from the research that I've done, it looks like if you just take archives, which are like zip files or RAR files, but mostly zip files for Windows users, and then Microsoft Office documents, so PowerPoints, Excel, Word documents. Those two alone, you could see, you can do your own math there, but it's over 2/3 of the malware that's delivered over email is just in those 2 different extensions. And so the reason is it's tough to block that, right? We do business. The primary goal of business is to be in business and make money, or if you're a nonprofit, to do good. And so you have to be able to do business. And by doing business, you need to be able to have zip files, PDFs, Microsoft Office documents. So it's very tough for security and IT teams to block those. And they're always different, right? It's one thing if we're talking about executables and we can put a hash or a fingerprint on it and say, we can identify this as WannaCry or this is Emutet. But when we're talking about Word documents, you can't really fingerprint that, because how many times are Word documents changing, or PDFs? I mean, they're almost always new files, so you're not going to be able to fingerprint them as well compared to other types of malware. Next slide. And so I thought, why not? Let's talk a little bit about MITRE ATT&CK here. And if you're not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, I recommend doing a quick Google search after this talk. But those of you who are a little bit more veterans here, MITRE ATT&CK's a way for us to see different types of attacks and understand how to detect them. And it's an awesome grid that MITRE put out. And we could see different columns there, like initial access, execution, persistence. I can hear my gardener outside. Apologize about that. Privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, and whatnot. And so what I'm going to talk about with phishing here is really you can hit multiple different, if you want to play the MITRE ATT&CK bingo game, you can hit a lot of different pieces in there by using phishing. You can do drive-by compromise, you could do spear phishing attachments, spear phishing links, spear phishing, etc. There's a whole bunch of different things in there in the initial access that attackers can use, whether it's phishing or just this Punycode I'm going to talk about in general, to gain access, initial access to an organization during an attack phase. So let's talk a little bit more about the state of phishing and what we're seeing currently in my team as we respond to incidents, we protect some of our clients. So it's constantly a cat and a mouse game. You've got the attackers trying new techniques on a regular basis, like some of the things I'm going to talk about, and then you have the defenders coming up with new ways to detect that. And once that's detected, then the attackers go back to the drawing board, come up with new techniques, and then they will launch those attacks. And then we start seeing what happens, and we quickly try and put more defensive controls or detective controls in place, and it's just back and forth, back and forth. So you can't just put something in place or buy a tool. It's not necessarily this vendor, but I'm just gonna throw it out there, like Mimecast. You can't just put Mimecast in place as an email gateway, or Barracuda or whoever, and assume, hey, I'm safe. It's constantly a back and forth where you got to tweak your controls, your detective and preventative controls. Then they're gonna get bypassed. Then you have to put more in place, but you constantly have to learn what the bad guys are doing and then adjust your techniques from there. So some of the things I'm seeing a lot lately are encrypted attachments, and it's really interesting is that a lot of attachments, the email gateways were starting to look at attachments and look for malicious activity or things that were not right in those attachments. So then the defensive controls or the email gateway tools, they would put in things that are starting to do OCR, and they're reading the attachments and looking for malicious things like click here or, blah, 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 whatever the common words were that the attackers were using. So then the attackers in the cat mouse game, they then started saying, okay, well, we're going to then encrypt our attachments so that the email gateways cannot read what's inside those attachments. And then we're going to put a password in the body of the email. And I'll show you an example. I think it's pretty clever. And then I'm also seeing obfuscation. Last year, I saw for the very first time ransomware has been around for a long time, but the first time I've ever seen a physical threat, and this organization or this hacking group sent an email to your clients, and they used obfuscation techniques to bypass the email gateways and basically said, there's a bomb under your building, you need to pay us or else we are going to detonate the bomb in your building. We're seeing a lot of AI or machine learning type of things that are trying to detect malicious activities. We're seeing then a bunch of new bypass techniques. I'll talk about a couple of those, but ultimately the users are still the weakest link. You can play this cat and mouse game in your organization, but it's going to come down to when things get through the email gateway, are your users going to click that? So here's one of those examples I was talking about with the encrypted email. I think this is super clever. This was a mortgage lender client that we have, and they received an email. And one thing you have to know about mortgage lenders, because you might look at this and say, I've done security awareness training, I'm a security professional, there's an AOL account as the sender, that's malicious. Well, what happens in the real estate and mortgage lending and escrow space is that there's a lot of different parties involved, and a lot of them are salespeople. And so what happens with that, whether you're title or escrow or mortgage or real estate, they don't want to use their corporate email. So they don't want to use the @example.com. They use their Gmail or Yahoo or AOL account because they want to be able to move from, let's say, Keller Williams to, that's the one that came to the top of my mind. But what are the other, real estate companies are, and they don't want to they don't want to lose those clients. So they want to use the same email as they hop from broker to broker. And the same thing happens in the mortgage space. So it's very common to see these Gmail, Yahoo, or these free accounts rather than a paid account, and tons of financial documents being sent. In fact, my mother-in-law was trying to refinance her house recently, and she was working with someone who was a friend or a friend of a friend, and asked for my opinion. I look at it and I'm seeing that they are communicating, and she's the real estate agent or the mortgage person is asking my wife's mother for her tax returns and documents, and she has a Yahoo account, and there's no secure portal to upload it to. There's nothing there aside from just attach it to the email to a free account. And it drove me crazy that this is the kind of thing we see in the industry, but it's very common in the real estate market to see stuff like this, unfortunately. So that wasn't the suspicious part, but what was really interesting is that the attacker then knew that, so they didn't even have to spoof the email. They just sent a Yahoo email, and they said, here's some kind of executive documents or part of the mortgage process, the real estate purchasing process, and I've put the attachment because I am so security focused. I didn't just put this attachment in clear text, I actually encrypted it. And the password is 123456. So the email gateways did not pick up on this because the document it actually had phishing content inside of it, but they couldn't read that because it was an encrypted attachment. I have seen some more advanced email gateways will scan the email for the word password and then take the password and try it against the encrypted attachment to decrypt it and then look inside. But I thought it was interesting because they're trying to say how they're security focused and they're a senior escrow officer and they're trying to do this for security, but then really the password is 1234 and they're using a Yahoo account. But this is common and it bypassed the email gateway. So this was definitely one of the more interesting ones. It's getting a little bit older now, but I thought it was super cool when I first saw it. Once the user ended up opening the attachment, putting the password in, it then said it was a Google Doc, which is weird because it's a PDF. And it said to view this document, click here, you click there, and then it's a credential harvesting page that looked like Gmail or G Suite. Here's the other one that I was mentioning. One of our other clients who got the email saying that there was a pipe bomb in the bottom of their building. And if you look at the user's view at the top there, it just says 3 PVC pipe bombs placed under the building. It went on and went on, but there was some specifics about the company I had to redact there. The actual text there is .3 space dot space P dot V dot C dot space dot P dot, and you wouldn't see that because they were using the dots or the periods were in white font and they were very small, whereas the other text was larger. So it looked like, why didn't the word bombs get caught by our email gateway and that go to the administrator? And that's because they obfuscated the text there. So I thought that was another interesting technique for 2 reasons. One, obfuscation, but also that they were doing a physical threat of harm for a ransom. And obviously, you think it's kind of like swatting or it's a fake thing, especially when the IP address came from Russia. But we couldn't be laissez-faire about it and just say, it is what it is. We actually had to call law enforcement, and they had to have dogs come out and, check the building. I felt horrible about that because I was fairly confident that it was fake. But at the same time, you can't risk, human safety. Anyone who's got a CISSP, that's the first thing you focus on. Zero fonts, very similar to that last example, is another technique I saw, and this worked for quite some time, a lot less these days. But if you look at the top there, Microsoft Email Gateway would see OH space pound $, parent sign, copyright sign, exclamation point, space 2. And, it doesn't really look like anything malicious there, right? You don't see a whole lot of bad stuff. But then if you look down further, I tried to make it a little bit smaller so you'd see some of those characters that were that are eventually in the technique are going to be whited out. I made those in red. So you can see I started shrinking it down, and now you could start seeing copyright 2018 Microsoft Corporation. And then further down there of what really the users see is copy sign 2018 Microsoft Corporation. So what they're doing is they're doing a span, they're using HTML, and they're doing a font size 0. And that way all those texts, the different characters and stuff like that are small, grayed out, and you won't actually be able to see any of that stuff. But Microsoft or your email gateway is not going to notice that. It's seeing all the characters as equal and doesn't realize that when the font size is 0, not to pay attention to that or subtract that out of the final message. Another piece is that, these are a couple different categories. I guess I would place them into the different techniques that attackers use. And actually, when we do phishing campaigns, that we'll use these days as well. Typo squatting, but that technique, typically you are sitting and waiting. It might be more for a red team engagement, less for a penetration test, or it could be a nation state that's sitting there for a long time. If anyone has read about the Bangladesh bank heist, if you have not, go check out Darknet Diaries. They did a episode on that a few months ago, I believe, and it was really interesting. And that they set up like bank accounts a year in advance to try and let them sit and wait. Similar type of concept is you're buying domains, kind of sitting and letting them wait. Red team engagement or nation state. It's not something you do on a weak penetration test. Doppelganger domains, another thing. It's kind of a sit and a wait technique. Bit squatting, you can use that for phishing and also sitting and waiting. Transposition, we use that a lot with our clients. We use transposition and Punycode, and I'll explain a little bit more what these are, but those are kind of the techniques we use for phishing or spirit phishing on a regular basis now. So another thing about what we're seeing is not only these phishing techniques where they're trying to send you to an Office 365 login page or G Suite login page, but we're also seeing now a lot, both in the press and cases we're working that I can't really talk in detail about, are Office 365 phishing campaigns. But then when the user clicks on an attachment, it will basically add an extension or add-in that will then begin to forward emails to a Gmail account. SANS saw the same thing. I worked a case with my team a little while ago at a government entity that was very similar to the SANS case. So they were public about it, so you can go look at that. The stuff that we do, it's under NDA, so I can't talk about it, but I can tell you that if you look at the SANS incident and their write-up, and they actually did an hour webcast that I highly recommend, we are seeing a whole lot of that, where, again, there's a phishing campaign, someone clicks on the phishing attachment or email, it adds an extension or an add-in to Office 365 for that user, which then forwards emails to a Gmail account, and no one knows any different. This is the one that SANS saw, again, because it's public. I can put pictures here, whereas the ones we work I can't really talk about. But you'll see an email like this where it says, a file's been shared with you, copy of July bonuses 2020. You click open. When you click open, it says, permission requested. You need to basically give it permission to add this app. Users kind of look at this. They're used to doing this when they add apps all the time on their phone, their computer, so they click accept. This makes sense. Office 365 needs access to these things. Legit. Press yes, accept. And then from there, what happens is that all emails going to that user then get forwarded to a Gmail account, and there's no notice. It's not like a banner on the top of your Outlook or OWA account, and you don't see anything. It's just behind the scenes, all your emails are being siphoned off to another user. So let's talk a little bit more about typo squatting first. So typo squatting, I've seen this also work quite a few times. They'll use things like .cm, which is another country's top-level domain, but basically waiting for someone to miss that O when they type it out. So like Facebook.cm, HomeDepot.cm, it would go to the malicious site instead of the actual HomeDepot.com or Facebook.com. I don't see this working well in phishing domain or phishing campaigns, because typically people look at the extension at the end, the top level domain, and they'll realize that it's a CM instead of .com. So not super effective for phishing or spear phishing, but I have seen plenty of users mistype or forget the O or just slip when they type it on the keyboard, and then they land on a page that looks like facebook.com or homedepot.com. But that takes a lot of sitting and waiting, and it's really more of a mass campaign trying to wait for people who are trying to go to those popular sites to come to your site. Okay, kind of like a watering hole attack. And then you have a fake or clone URL, some other targets. I find sometimes it works for red team engagements, but if you are working for a specific company, and we're not talking about like Facebook or Home Depot, but let's say Joe's Crab Shack, right? It's going to take a long time for you having that domain sitting and waiting for someone to make the typo and come to your domain. And then also you got to be very careful that you're not then compromising other people that are outside the scope of your engagement. So that's this one, there's very few cases that'll use something like this in the real world. However, we will occasionally take a look at mistyping for a phishing campaign, kind of like the example on the right-hand side. We'll kind of do transposition, but that's really more of a transposition technique where we're changing letters out or adding an extra letter, generally towards the middle of a word, because the way humans read when they're looking at google.com, example.com, you look at the first couple characters, 2 to 3 characters, and then at the end you look at the last few characters and your mind fills in the blank. Right? If you ever looked at speed reading or anything like that, that's one of those techniques, is that you're not reading the whole word. We just get used to these words, and we look at the first couple characters and the last couple characters and miss the middle. So frequently we'll swap out the middle. If we can find good characters to swap out in the middle, that works, but that's more of on the transposition side. This is one I actually just today my team was working on, so I quickly added this slide in here. You could see it was a few hours ago that we were actually working on this for one of our clients. We're doing a pen test and a social engineering engagement. So we did one of these techniques, and I just want to show you what something would look like from the attacker's perspective. So this, my colleague who's setting up our phishing campaign, he sent this to me this morning, and these are some of the things, a real world example of what we're going to deploy later today to or maybe tomorrow, because Fridays tend to work a little better, but we're going to send something like this. They've got Office 365. We're going to go ahead and send this out on behalf of the VP, Director of Technology and Marketing, telling them that there was a suspicious login. We're not asking them to change a password or anything like that. They just click on this because obviously they're not in Bogota, Colombia. And once they click on the here link there, they're going to go and get an Office 365 lookalike page. They'll enter their credentials, and then we'll harvest that and we'll gain access to their environment. So some countermeasures to typo squatting. Well, if you identify a typo squatting domain because the user clicked on it or it's out there in the world, you can report that. You can purchase a domain if it's available. You can block that on your internal DNS. You can train your users to be very careful when they're looking at domains, especially like Office or Microsoft pages, and make sure that they're not going to a page that looks like that and looking for those little things like, in my opinion, actually here, I got back to my colleague who's working on this. If you can see the signature at the bottom, just below sincerely, there's a gray line, and that's because he took a screenshot of the guy's signature rather than actual text. And then also the mortgage at the bottom there, it's a little bit fuzzy. So those are 2 comments that I had if we need to improve that slightly, but those are the kind of things you want your users to catch on. I know it's difficult when you're moving quickly, but you want to take a look at those things and get your users very familiar with that, of like, wait a second, why is there a gray line, just to the left of the signature? Why is mortgage a little bit fuzzy? Those things are just, again, things you want to train your users on. You can also use password managers. I'm a big fan of password managers for many reasons, but in this case, it also helps with typo squatting or really any of these techniques I'm going to talk about, in the fact that if your users have a really long, complex password that they'll never remember in LastPass or whatever password manager they're using, when they go ahead and click on the email here, if they clicked on here, they're going to go to a page that looks like office.com. However, they're going to look at LastPass or whatever password manager they have, and they're going to realize that there's actually no known passwords for that. And that's going to raise a red flag. Like, wait a second. First of all, I don't even know my own password for Office 365 because it's 32 characters long, so I can't even enter it if I wanted to. But why is it telling me that it doesn't remember a password for this page? So I go to my password manager and I type in Office and I say go to this page, and it's going to go to the real office.com and let me log in, and then there's going to be no suspicious activity. So it's really not just training your users because they're realizing that there's no known password for that page, but also if they're using really long passwords they don't even know, they don't even have the option to enter their credentials on those phishing landing pages. And then one other thing they could do is fuzzy strings. So some SIMs and logging solutions have this technique of fuzzy string searches, and you can look for domains that are within a certain degree of similarity of a domain of your interest. So for example, example.com. And if I use a fuzzy search for DNS queries of example.com, it's gonna give me example.com. It'll give me matches that are like examlpe.com, the example on the right-hand side there that I have, or anything that looks like example.com but is not exactly example.com. So that's another technique you can use if you have a SIM or log management solution. Doppelgangers. This is something that a colleague of mine, Peter Kim, who wrote the Hacker Playbook, came up with. It's an awesome article. If you search his name in wired.com, you'll be able to read. It's about an 11-page white paper that he wrote up, research paper, along with his another colleague, Garrett, that owns Hacker Warehouse. It was an awesome project that they worked on. Basically, they took advantage of omissions rather than any typos. So if you see at the bottom there, Mike at us.rmts.com, it doesn't exist. But if that was our domain, and many large enterprises have this, where they have us.rmts.com, eu.rmts.com, CN for China.rmts.com, or whatever it is, they've got the different regions and different subdomains. Well, a lot of Fortune 500 companies do this. Actually, 151 to be exact of the 151 of the Fortune 500 were susceptible to this type of attack. There was for example, usrmts.com, right? Because the actual domain is usrmts.com that you can go ahead and purchase, whereas the real legitimate domain or subdomain is us.rmts.com. So I can go register usrmts.com and the company doesn't know any different. So I am then relying on omission that someone's going to type in an email, Mike at us, and they're going to forget the dot, rmts.com, and then any email they sent or they thought they were going to send to the real Mike at us.rmts.com is going to go to me, and then I can intercept that email. So they decided to buy 151 domains, the ones that were susceptible of the Fortune 500, and they then just sat there for 6 months. And over 6 months, they received 120,000 emails of people that made this omission. Okay, that's over the 151 different companies. And if you just kind of put a blanket statement there, an average, you could say, well, there's 151 companies, 120,000 emails. You know, what is it? About a little bit less than that, 8,000 or 9,000 emails per company over 6 months. So if you did this and you work for a large organization, you could just sit there and collect thousands and thousands of emails over 6 months. And they took a look at that, of the 20 gigabytes worth of emails that they received over 6 months, and they tried to quantify them with keywords. And so they said, we did basically a lookup of keywords and tried to find the most common words. They found 350 instances of investigation, almost 500 instances of login, 425 instances of unclassified, 300 invoices, 400 credit card numbers, 374 confidential emails, 394 private messages, 75 VPN credentials, 225 user IDs, 400 passwords, 163 router configurations, 275 resumes, 417 contracts. I mean, it just went on and on and on. It's a great article if you check that out from 2011. So what are some countermeasures that you could do to prevent doppelganger attacks? Well, you can purchase those domains. If you use us.example.com, go buy usexample.com. All right, you're going to have to try and think of all those different ones and look at all your subdomains and make sure you purchase those, but that is a countermeasure. You could identify others that own the Doppelganger domains and dispute those. I have tried to dispute domains in the past, and it's been years with no resolution. There are some companies that specialize in it. I'm sure they're better at it than I am, but it is a lengthy, expensive process. You can also have your DNS servers not resolve those Doppelganger domains if someone else owns them, and not allow any emails, outbound emails. You could also train your users, notify customers if you find those, but not a ton of great options for that. So now let's talk about the meat of this presentation, Punycode and international domain names. So what in the world is Punycode? Well, it's defined in RFC 3492. If you have insomnia, go ahead and read that document. Otherwise, I'll give you a brief summary here. Well, think about, and I think the best way I can explain this to people is that look at your keyboard that's in front of you right now. Do you see any characters in Dutch or German or Cyrillic or Mandarin or any other language like that? My keyboard just has US English characters on it here. I actually have two keyboards in front of me, and both of them don't have any characters like that backward R or the backward N or those Dutch or German vowels there either. So, but they obviously exist, and we have to have some way to get to them. So since we don't have those characters, I don't know if any of you used to use AOL Instant Messenger back in the day, but if you did, remember if you pressed like the Alt key and then a bunch on your 10 key, you pressed a couple characters, it would give weird things like the check mark or funky characters like that. Obviously, those characters exist. We just didn't have the keys for them on our keyboard. So those exist, as well as the other languages. All those things exist out there. We just can't type them on our keyboards. So Punycode gives us basically it's a way of encoding. It's used to convert Unicode characters to ASCII so that we can get to those domains, so that we can go to a browser and actually go to a Russian website without having Russian characters on our keyboard. And so it's used to encode international domain names. Again, if it's all Russian or all German or whatever language that you're interested in, it's a way to convert that or encode it. Okay, that's the summary of it. So I kind of went over this already. There's many different characters in green at the bottom of the screen there that I don't have on my keyboard. And so if I wanted to use those characters when I go to a domain, I could use Punycode. And the format for which Punycode works is that it is XN -- and then any US characters or English characters followed by another dash and then the special characters. So for example, if I was going to example and then that funny looking e.com, it would be xn -- example - the Punycode characters for that funny e.com. And I'll show you an example here. So I bought LinkedIn.com, but it's obviously not LinkedIn.com. The I looks a little bit weird. Rather than a dot, it's got kind of the smiley face, if you will, or a upside down rainbow, whatever you want to call that thing. So if you look at it in your browser, it would look like LinkedIn.com with a funny looking eye. But if I wanted to type that, since I don't have that funny looking eye on my keyboard in front of me here, I could go to my browser, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, whatever I have in front of me, and type xn -- LNKEDIN UEB. The UEB is that funny looking eye.com. That's the equivalent to the ASCII character above. So how do we actually use this if we wanted to set up a phishing campaign? Or how would the attacker use this if they wanted to essentially compromise us using this technique? Well, this is the steps that you would have to take if you want to do it at a high level. You would basically look for languages with English-like characters. So what I mean by that is if you were trying to target box.com, you might look at Cyrillic and say, well, they have 3 characters that look somewhat similar to our box.com. The B looks a little bit different, but otherwise that looks very much so like box.com. So you're going to have to look for those different languages. Cyrillic, for example, they've got A, B, C, E, O, P, Y, and X characters that look very much like the US English characters, but you're going to have to look at many different languages to figure out which ones look closest to your domain that you're interested in buying. You find once you find that language, you want to make sure that all the characters exclusively can be used in that language, and I'll show you why in a second. So for example, box.com, I was able to use Cyrillic because all those characters I could find looked like US characters in Cyrillic, but I wouldn't want to take one Cyrillic character, one US character, one Chinese character, one, whatever it is. There's too many different languages. You want to use the same language throughout your entire domain. You're then going to convert that once you find those ASCII characters that look like your domain. You're then going to go to a website to convert those Punycode characters or the ASCII characters to Punycode. So you basically just copy and paste that, and then you add a .com, and you can search your registrar. Like I prefer Google Domains because you get private registration for free, and it accepts Punycode characters. So I don't even need to convert it to Punycode. I can just copy the ASCII equivalent and it'll convert it for me. So I just like Google Domains for that reason. You go ahead and buy it, or if it's not available, then you're going to go ahead and keep looking for another one that's similar. So I find Wikipedia to be the best source to find these characters. I'm sure there's another site that's even better than that, and if you find it, let me know. But Wikipedia, you can search for the different languages, and then it's got a table with the ASCII equivalent. So you can look at those and say, okay, I see the B, O, X, those look similar to box.com. I'm going to go ahead and go to punycoder.com, copy and paste those characters into the text field, press the convert to Punycode button, and it'll come out with xn-n1aot.com, which is the equivalent to my fake box.com. So then I copy and paste that into Google Domains or GoDaddy or wherever you want, and you go ahead and find that domain, see if it's available. You search, and if it's available, you go ahead and buy it. If not, you go back to the drawing board. Then what I typically do is I go to AWS. You can go to Eddy Public Cloud, but I just find AWS Lightsail to be very simple. It's free for the first month. If my phishing campaign is less than a month, it would only cost me that $12 to buy the domain. Otherwise, it's $3.50 a month, super cheap. I'll spin up a Ubuntu server. I get a static IP address. I add, by default, for some reason, the firewall only allows inbound 22 for SSH and 80 for HTTP, but we want HTTPS, so you add that to the firewall rule. I then, just for my demonstration here, I installed Apache and Git. If you were going to do this in the real world, I would recommend using GoPhish. It's an awesome free open source phishing campaign tool that tracks opens, clicks, credentials. It's got it all, but I wanted to show you how simple this was and do it for illustration. So you're basically spending $12 a year for that domain. You might even be able to return it in the first 72 hours if it's a really quick phishing campaign. So this might even be a free phishing campaign for you. Then you basically go to AWS, Lightsail, or whatever cloud solution you're using. You add that HTTPS to the inbound ports. You grab that static IP. In my case, my demo was 54.218.148.158. You go to Google Domains. You add that in for both the root domain as well as a www subdomain. So if they go to www.box.com or just box.com, it's going to go to your web server there. It's going to resolve. This is how simple it is, okay? So now that we bought the domain, we've mapped it, we set up our server, we mapped it all. This is how easy it is to get started. And this is not, I would use GoPhish, which is a little more complicated in the real world, but I just wanted to show you for the simplicity it's only like 10 steps and you're good to go with your phishing server or your cloned web server. So I do updates. That's the first line there. I then do an apt-get install Apache 2. So now I've got a web server. I then just echo owned. So I'm basically just putting the word owned into an index.html file. So when you go to my web server, you're going to see that word owned to prove that it works. I then install Git. I do an apt-get install Git. So I can then use or clone Let's Encrypt, which allows me to have a SSL TLS certificate. And you could see by those, 5 steps there. And even the last 2 steps don't even count here. So the first 3 steps there on that screenshot on the top right there, we have a web server set up and we've got some text there. When you go to the IP address, it resolves and you can see that I own that web server. We then need to, rather than an IP address here of 54.218, because that's not box.com, I want it to actually resolve to our fake box.com. What I need to do is add the host name in there. One thing I can tell you is that if you copy and paste the ASCII version of box.com, like you see up in the URL there, if you put that into your host name file, it would be it wouldn't resolve properly. So one kind of trial and error thing that I had is that if you type host name and then you do the xn dash dash and your Punycode, it will resolve properly. So it was kind of a learning curve there. I then also added to the host name file. And at that point, then once we go ahead and go to our fakebox.com, you can see it's the same site. It says owned right there. So now when someone goes to or clicks on our fakebox.com, they get the same page that we had in this previous step. Okay, and so now we say, but that's awesome, but we train our users. We can see there that there's a little exclamation point. There's no green lockbox that we train our users to look out for. We can fix that for free. So we go to Let's Encrypt, which we downloaded from GitHub. We then run the Let's Encrypt auto script. We tell it it's running Apache, and the domain name is our Punycode, xn-n1aot.com. It'll then ask you for an email address, so you go put a fake Gmail account in there and you're good to go. And then you also do the www version in case you want www.box.com to work as well. Those, 3 lines of code right there, we can now see if we go to https://box.com, we get the green checkbox. You might say, wait a second, how did you get a valid certificate for box.com? You don't own box.com. I know, but I own xn-n1aot.com, which in ASCII looks just like box.com. So I was able to get that. So now we've got the green lockbox. We have HTTPS, which we train our users to look at. We've got the actual spelling of box.com. I didn't do BOZ.com. It's BOX.com. Everything we've trained our users on, it's legitimate. But wait a second, the background of my web service is owned, and that doesn't look like the login page for box.com. So let's fix that. Right, so there's the real box.com, and here's our fake one. And you can see I blew it up so you can tell the difference. And if you compare them side by side or one above the other, that the real box versus ours, it's slightly different on the B there, but if you weren't comparing them right side by side like this, you probably would not notice the difference. And it looks very similar, except for the fact that there's a logo on the realbox.com and it's blue background. So let's fix that now. So there's many different tools that you could use for this. Social engineering toolkit, I'm a big fan of, but I like GoFish a whole lot more. It's just complicated setup. The HTTP track tool, I use that just because it was 3 lines of code, and I'm trying to show you how simple this is. Whereas GoFish, there's many steps along the way. So I just used HTTP track to, I installed it. So I did an apt-get install HTTP track, web HTTP track, and I said yes. And then I changed directories into my Apache web server directory. And then the third line there, I did HTTP track, https://therealbox.com. N1 basically says just go one level deep. So I didn't want to clone the entire box.com website. I just wanted to clone the first landing page. So if you clicked on any links, it wouldn't work. But again, I just wanted to show you in 3 lines of code, I cloned the realbox.com, and we now have that in our var www HTML folder, which is the Apache's root directory. If you would have used GoFish, which is what we use internally along with Social Engineering Toolkit, it would have looked something like this, where you actually send out, after you clone the page, you then get notices like this. And you could see that the test user, test@test.com, they opened the email on January 29th, 2016 at 9:26 a.m. They clicked the email that same minute. And then if there was any credentials that, because it was like Office 365 or Box login page, you would actually get a copy of their username and password as well. So that's why I like GoFish. It's a really good platform for doing phishing campaigns. But again, I just wanted 3 lines of code. We cloned box.com, and now we have this. So here we've got, you can see at the top, again, back to your security awareness training that you make all your new employees do, which, by the way, it drives me crazy every time I work at a new company, including when I started teaching at the local colleges and building their security programs. I had to go take security awareness training before I could teach a class. When I became the director of security services at Richie May, I had to do security awareness training, which drives me crazy as a security person because I feel like I know more than these 30-minute videos, but I digress. We train our users here to look at HTTPS, the green checkbox or the green lockbox, www, box.com. Everything is perfect there. So, and look at the page. I don't have any pixelation. The box logo is legit. Everything looks like the identical box.com. And if there was a login page here, I wouldn't notice any different. I did my due diligence like I was taught in security awareness training. I entered my username and password, and now I'm compromised. Okay, so there is a little bit of a catch with this though. After I did this first page here of box.com, I was like, this is phenomenal. I can basically, for any domain, I can go buy it and we can use this. No users will ever know. It's almost like cheating on a test. I can always get people to fall for this trick. I just need to go buy like linkedin.com, office.com, facebook.com, and we've got like the best phishing platform ever. So I started buying other domains, especially around LinkedIn. And I ran into some problems because the second domain that I bought, I looked in the URL after I typed in linkedin.com, which is the fake version of it, or I clicked a link, and all of a sudden in the URL I saw xn -- and it didn't look like linkedin.com anymore. And I started wondering why that was the case. So I started testing more and more URLs, and I figured out there was inconsistencies when you buy a domain that looks like another one in Punycode, that sometimes I was able to see the actual Punycode and the ASCII characters, and sometimes I was seeing the Punycode, and it was not consistent. So I did a lot of research around this to figure out why that was the case. So I want to show you a couple examples here across different platforms. This was in 2018. When I first did this research back in, I think, 2017, I was updating this like every time I gave this presentation. But after I gave this presentation, I don't know, 7 times over the course of about a year, and there was no difference, I thought, I'm tired of testing these domains and buying them. No one's really changing. So for a year span after I've been doing this presentation, I haven't really seen any changes. So even though we're in 2020 and the date stamp here is 2018, I'm pretty confident that it still works the same way. So what I did is I bought a domain, tax.com. Being that I work for Richie May, it was traditionally an accounting and tax firm. I bought tax.com, but all Serbian characters. And you could see there, it was probably one of my best URLs. Tax.com, there's no deviation. It looks like real English characters. And so I bought that. It was all Serbian characters. And I started testing it. So I looked at Firefox, and at the time this was up to date. I made sure all my browsers were up to date. And in Firefox, you could see it's not the real tax.com. I owned that. But when I typed it in there in Firefox, it was legit. It didn't change it back to Punycode. It was all the ASCII characters, so I was able to use this for a phishing campaign. With Chrome, same kind of thing. I clicked on a link, and in the browser, it's all ASCII characters, tax.com. It looked legitimate. I was good to go with Chrome. So then I move over to Opera. Same thing, up-to-date version of Opera, all ASCII characters, tax.com. Then I moved over to Internet Explorer, and I clicked on the link. And wait a second, it's no longer the ASCII characters. It is now xn-80a9ak.com. That's weird. Why does Internet Explorer well, that's because it's probably the most secure browser out there, right? And I thought, let's look at Edge. So I looked at Edge. Same thing happened. It converted tax.com to xn-80a9ak.com. I thought that was super weird. Both Internet Explorer and Edge, which we typically think of as the most secure browser, right? Did that. But all the other browsers kept the ASCII characters. So that kind of blew my mind of why that was going on. I, at the time, did not have a Mac. I should probably update this now that I actually have a Mac. So it was an outdated version of Safari, since they don't support that anymore. And it did the same thing. And I thought, wow, even an outdated legacy version of Safari converted tax.com to the Punycode equivalent. It was really interesting. What about Slack? At the time, again, this was the updated version of Slack, pre-pandemic. I copied and pasted my ASCII equivalent into a Slack channel, pressed enter, and all of a sudden it converted it to xn-, in the Punycode equivalent. What about Microsoft Teams, right? Since Internet Explorer and Edge did it and converted it to Punycode and made sure that we saw that it wasn't the real tax.com, Internet Explorer must do that. Nope. Actually, Microsoft Teams did not convert it. So when I copied and pasted that into Teams, it was the ASCII equivalent, which I thought was really weird. So we would do something like this, and you already saw a better version of our phishing campaign, but it's super basic. You would send something like this to your user saying there's some unusual activity on tax.com account, to unlock your account or change your password, click on this link, and you could see there Yes, if you're really looking for it, tax.com looks a little bit different. It looks like a capital T, but the capital is the same size as the lowercase. But you're busy, you're in a pandemic, you've got kids, you're homeschooling, there's so much going on in your world that people do not see that difference. There's such a slight deviation in that and the realtax.com. People do not see this from experience. Okay, so then I tried, well, what about if I took Polish characters and English characters? Let's mix it. I first used all Serbian, but now let's take a look at one Polish character and the rest English character. It's like a tongue twister there. So I bought LinkedIn.com, but I made sure the L was very distinct there. That's not the real LinkedIn. The L is a Polish L. So I bought that domain. I went to Firefox, and you could see there that Firefox.com, in the ASCII equivalent, our Punycode, it was the international domain. It did not convert it back to Punycode. So I was like, great, it still works in Firefox. Let's try Chrome. In Chrome, though, this time it actually converted it from ASCII to Punycode. So now we're seeing the XN -INKED, or IN because that's the English characters, dash, and then that's that funny L is MJB, the equivalent. Then Opera, same thing. Now it converted it to the Punycode equivalent. So when we looked at Internet Explorer, and as expected, it converted it like it did last time to Punycode. Edge, we'd expect the same, works that way. We then took a look at Slack, and Slack this time did not convert it, which was super weird because the first time it did convert it when it was all Serbian, but now we're using two different characters, which in my opinion, this is the part that bothers me the most about this, is that no one has two different character keyboards in front of them, right? And if you do, correct me, and I'll change my slides in my comment when I talk about this, but I don't have an English character on USB and then a Polish character keyboard sitting next to me so I can type domains that are in English and Polish. No, you either have an English character keyboard or a Polish character keyboard or whatever language you're working on, but you're not going to have two different keyboards with different languages and type a domain that's combining two different languages. It makes no sense. Yet, in this case, Slack thought that was more legitimate and it would do the ASCII equivalent of our mixed character offspring domain, whereas in the first example was all Serbian, it converted it to Punycode. So I thought that was a really weird finding with Slack. Safari, same kind of thing. In the last version, when we had all Serbian, it converted it to Punycode, but now we've got two different languages mashed together and it's not converting it, which is bizarre. So I kind of put this together so you can take a look at this, a screenshot, or see the recording or the slides later on, but I did multiple different characters or multiple different languages and domains, and for the most part, Firefox did not convert it to Punycode. It kept the ASCII equivalent except for one situation. Safari, for the most part, it did convert it to Punycode except for one situation. And Chrome was kind of a mix, half and half. Internet Explorer and Edge always converted it from ASCII to Punycode, which was the most secure. And then Opera seemed like it mimicked Chrome. And then Slack was a little bit of a mix as well. So I thought, what in the world? Why is Internet Explorer more secure? We generally think of Microsoft products as not being very secure, but why is it constantly converting it back? And so I tried a bunch of things. I tried changing my time zone. I tried changing the default language and location, all kinds of things. What I actually found out is that Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge are looking at the regional formats, not the location, not anything else, but the regional formats of your Windows system. And that is telling Internet Explorer and Edge which language that it should convert to Punycode or from ASCII to Punycode. So, for example, if your region is set to and your format is set to English, US English, any non-US characters will be converted to Punycode. Any domain like that will always be converted to Punycode. However, if you change that, so in the situation on the right there, I changed my regional format to Greek. And then I used all A's in Greek, like AAA.com, but all A's are in Greek. And then it did not convert it to Punycode. But then when I actually did US characters, it converted it to Punycode, which is kind of weird. So it is getting its source information from the regional format section. I didn't know of any exploits that I could do where I could send a phishing email and first change the regional settings of their computer and then get them to click on the link. So it's just important to know that if you know your target through OSINT or social engineering, that they are using Internet Explorer Edge as the primary browser, that Punycode is not going to be the technique that you want to use. So why is this the case that we saw some differences between the browsers? Why is it not like the FCC or someone else has come up with RFC, some type of standard that all browsers follow? Well, I started looking at the different browsers and some of their stances on this. And so what Safari said in their defense when this came out years and years ago is that it's the responsibility of the domain owner to check the whole script homographics and register them. So basically, Safari is saying you as the company are responsible for checking all variations of your domain in every language or lookalike language and register them before someone else does. Doesn't seem reasonable to me, but that's their defense. I believe that's because they just don't want to fix the problem. What about Mozilla? Our response to this issue is that in the end, it is up to the registrars, so not the end user that owns domains, but the registrars, to make sure that their customers cannot rip each other off. So they're basically pointing the finger at GoDaddy and Network Solutions and Google Domains and saying it's not our problem, it's not the owner's problem, but it's the registrar's problem. Okay, so they're pointing the finger as well. So I looked at it, I said, okay, let's take Safari's thought on this, and that it's you, the business owner's responsibility to basically go ahead and buy every domain. So what would that look like? So I basically went out to GitHub and I downloaded a tool called DNS Twist. DNS Twist will take a domain name and it tries to find variants of that. It's not perfect because I tried LinkedIn.com and I still found ones that they didn't find, but let's just start here. If you did LinkedIn.com, it would come up with 262 domain variants, and again, it's missing some. If you go register all those domains at $12 a year, you're spending $3,144 a year on these domains, right? And then we have to think about, wait a second, what about all those omission ones like US dot, every version of this? So now you've got to buy another $3,000 worth, and then EU dot. Or forgetting the dot, sorry, the omission, EU LinkedIn.com. So now I need another 3,000. I mean, you're spending tens of thousands of dollars basically trying to block off attackers from not using these homographic domains or the IDNs or Punycode domains. It's ridiculous. I think that statement that you need to come up with every variant is just, it blows my mind. So I just wanted to show you there are tools out there that you can try and defend yourself and get the different variants, but you can already see even for LinkedIn, look at how many different IP addresses have already registered these variations. There's very few that are available that are not already registered because people are doing phishing attacks and they're using these variants of the domain. Okay. So in the browser's defense, though, and what they're actually doing to try and mitigate some of this is that some browsers are using a deny list of similar characters. So they're saying, and Cyrillic is one of those languages that is abused quite frequently. So they are taking those characters and like, well, the O and the X are too similar to the English characters, so we're not going to let those, we're going to basically put denies on them, or we're going to convert them if you're using those suspicious characters. So, okay, that works sometimes, but we saw it still didn't work in all cases for all browsers. Internet Explorer is looking at the computer system language, which I think is a great way of doing that, because if I have an English character keyboard, why am I typing in Polish? It doesn't make sense. Many of the browsers also looked for multiple languages, and if there was two languages mashed together, it converted to Punycode, which I think is great. However, there was one or two browsers we saw in those examples that still did not convert it, which don't know why that's happening. Doesn't make sense to me. And before 2012, Mozilla used to use an allow list of top-level domains, but after 2012, if the top-level domain is on the allow list, they unconditionally display the Unicode. If it's not, the algorithm applies, which basically has the denies, and certain things are, certain languages and characters are higher risk than other ones. So there's a whole write-up on that I just didn't have time to read. And then Mozilla's statements here is that if we just display any possible international domain name label, we open ourselves up to IDN homographic attacks, where one identical looking domain can be spoofed in others. So we have to have some mechanism to decide which ones to display and which ones not to display. which does not involve comparing the domain in question against every other single domain which exists, which would be impossible. So I get there. They don't have a good solution for it. I think it's interesting that they say they have their algorithms and ways of comparing them. Yet from my test, Mozilla, and it's not a wide test. I mean, you saw I bought like 10 domains. Mozilla was the worst at converting ASCII to Punycode. Okay, and then if you want to go look at Mozilla's, their algorithm and how they do some of this stuff, there is a repository of IDN best practices that they adhere to. It was announced in 2014, and so apparently they take some of this stuff and use it towards their algorithm of riskier or less riskier characters. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me still. So since the browsers and the registrars aren't doing anything, what can you do to protect yourself and your organization? Well, one, you can use the most secure browser, Internet Explorer and Edge. But if you're like me and you don't want to use that, you still want to use Firefox. What you can do is that there are some browser extensions. I have not vetted them all, but they will convert any Punycode domains or IDNs to Punycode. And that way your users can see the Punycode version of that anytime there's some other language. Not my best solution for that. I think the best solution is in Firefox setting. If you go into About Config, or you can actually deploy this through group policy across the profile for all of your users, you can push the setting, but it's off by default. The network.idn_show_Punycode config setting, it's set to false by default, but you can convert that to true, and therefore any Punycode domains or IDNs will be converted to Punycode for you. So if you are a Firefox user, that's probably one of the best solutions for that. The second best is a password manager like LastPass. So if you're trying to go to box.com and you clicked on a link and it's not the real box.com, but everything else looks identical, it's not going to show a password. And if you have a really complex password that you don't even know how to type out because it's 32 characters long, you can't even give them the credentials even if you tried. So I really think that the Firefox setting and the password manager are your two best options there. And some really good email protection gateways will detect on Punycode. However, I have not seen many do that. And also if the link's clicked on a website or some other way, then your email gateway is pretty much rendered useless as well. Another way you can detect this is that if you are logging DNS, which I recommend everyone does, if you're logging DNS, your DNS logs will show Punycode. It will not store the query logs in the IDN format or the ASCII equivalent. It converts it to Punycode. So even though I went to box.com, I clicked the link. I didn't even type it out. I clicked the link with the ASCII equivalent of box.com, and Firefox showed box.com equivalent in my browser. My DNS cache on my local Windows machine shows the record as www.xn-80a9ak.com. So if you can post forensically, you can look at the DNS resolver cache on a Windows system or Mac or whatever system you're looking at, and you could see that there. Additionally, if you are using EDR, since I'm going to CrowdStrike, maybe that's the one you want to use, or Carbon Black, or really whatever EDR you're using in your environment, right? There's not one that will do this versus the other, but you can set up those alerts. So if you have EDR deployed throughout your environment instead of a SIM, you can set the alert to xn-**, and that will basically query and alert you on any process that is doing a query for a Punycode domain. So this has alerted me probably more often than a SIM has, because the SIM typically we're not doing endpoint logging, or if they're off VPN, we don't see that. But if your EDR is set to doing that query, you'll get tons of these alerts. And it's bizarre. You'll find like Arabic domains and all kinds of weird things going on in your environment, which is kind of fun to investigate. If you are using a SIM, this example here is from Sumo Logic. I set this up for clients who are doing DNS logging. And so we basically take the source category of DNS logs, and then we set a where statement. So where the basically DNS query matches xn-. So any type of Punycode domain that there's a query on the internal DNS server, we get an email alert based off of that. And you could see some examples down there. There was a c.xn-eu2-nga domain. And so we looked that up, and we could see that was, you can tell by looking at it, EU2 is English, and then dash NGA, that is a Punycode character. So, or that's some other character that's not US English character. So it was a mix of two languages, which is definitely something I like to look at because it doesn't make sense for a human to type that. And then something else you could do also, especially for that phishing, is set up that possible phishing detection or anything that's external outside your organization. It notifies you. I like these, but I feel like so many emails come in with that external notice, and especially if the email's coming from, let's say, a spoofed Office 365 or LinkedIn, whether it's legitimate or it's a spoofed fake phishing email, it's going to say external anyway. So this isn't a fix-all solution. Okay, so just to recap of how you can apply this is that if you are using this as a offensive engagement or internally you want to deploy this to your organization, one of the first things that we didn't talk about is that you want to define your goals. It's so much fun, and in fact, it's my favorite thing that I do doing pen test and phishing campaigns, because I can't tell you how happy it makes me to break into a bank or trick users and find new ways to do this that bypasses our security awareness training, and I get 80-90% click rate. It makes me super happy, but that doesn't really benefit the organization. Just because I tricked all our users or a big portion of them doesn't mean that we're doing well. It doesn't justify my job. What does justify my job, what does help the organization, is that I define goals, metrics, and then we improve on them. So yeah, my first time I got 80-70% click rate or open rate or credentials. That's super cool for me, but that's horrible for the organization. And I need to now find ways to improve that. And the next time I use this technique, I need to have that rate drop down to 60, 50, 40%. So you got to define those goals rather than just going out and tricking your users, which is fun, but you need to have the business's interest in mind. Then you're going to find those good domain names, figure out which technique that we talked about that you want to use, launch your cloud instance, you get your static IP, make sure that you've got your firewall ports open, come up with a really compelling campaign. My suggestion is based off of things that you're seeing from attackers. That way you're mimicking the techniques, tactics, and procedures of the bad guys. Go Fish, I would recommend looking into that. Just for testing this out, you can use Social Engineering Toolkit or HTT Track like I showed you in the example, but really Go Fish, get familiar with that. It is a bit complicated, but once you set it up and have an image of that, it is a phenomenal tool, a free tool to do your phishing campaigns on a regular basis. If your company can't afford KnowBe4 or PhishMe, $3.50 a month, we can all afford that. Okay, and I'll just fly through these. The one other piece I didn't talk about is that how are you sending those emails? You can either do that through Gmail and set up an SMTP server, or you can set up postfix so that you are able to send those phishing emails outbound. There's some more technical steps on here, but I really just want to keep it kind of high level. And then of those building your campaigns, you really just want to think about urgency. You want to think about things that are happening in the real world. One that we got a high level of click-throughs, but I wasn't a giant fan of it because of the fact that it didn't really mimic what we were seeing in the real world, was that we told our employees, and this was when we were all working in the office, that there was a lost puppy of one of the employees in the office. We have some CCTV camera of the dog coming into the office. Click on the video to basically see what the dog looked like. And like 90% of people clicked on the video to try and see what the lost puppy looked like so they could help find it. Big click rate, but I don't see that in the real world. I don't see how that could be weaponized. A video file can't be weaponized as much as a Word document. So I try and keep it more realistic, try and mimic things I'm seeing in the real world so that it is realistic and we can prepare our users for the things that they're going to face in the real world. So with that, I'll close it off. I saw some questions come in that I didn't have time to get to. Again, I want to thank ISSA and this chapter and all of you for spending your, it's your afternoon with me. Appreciate you sharing or letting me share that research. If you have any questions or want to reach out after, my email address there will only work for another day or two, but you can connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. Happy to discuss more of this. I'm absolutely passionate about it. And next time you're thinking about security services, keep Richie May in mind, as they did, allow me to do this presentation for you.